That leaves, Sean, the NFC West as the only division we have not talked about yet. I mean, I get asked a lot about the Seahawks as Ryan Grubb, former coordinator for the Washington Huskies, takes over as the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks. We talked about this recently on the show, but basically, I felt like it's tough to get a strong read on what he is as a coordinator and to separate him from Kalen DeBoer, who was the offensive minded head coach at UW last year. I think you think positively. You think that he's going to probably bring a fun offense. The Huskies offense was one of the most exciting in college football last year. It's why Alabama went and hired DeBoer, and it's why the Seahawks went down to the college level and grabbed an OC and brought him up to the NFL level because it was an innovative, forward-thinking, modern offense, a lot of misdirection, a lot of motion, all of the things that you want to see, and they should get coaches excited. And so not surprising to me that McDonald takes over as the head coach. He's that guy on the defense side of the ball, and he says, what's the type of offense that I'm most scared of when I scheme up defenses? And it's these offenses that are doing these things, that they cause so many challenges. So let's go grab a lesser heralded, college offensive coordinator, but let's get him up here at the NFL level and be an offensive coordinator. I think you have to feel optimistic that Seattle's going to put in some more modern concepts than they maybe were and have been under their past coordinators and under the tutelage of Pete Carroll as the head coach. And yet I don't necessarily know how that's all going to play out. I mean, I think you saw a lot of vertical passing with the Huskies. That's favorable for DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. That's those types of players. I think you're also going to see positive stuff from JSN. I am excited to see JSN in a better offense because I do think there was big issues with his usage in year one. I don't know that I can really buy into Geno Smith though either. Like with Sam Howell there. I mean, are you playing the Seattle quarterback way one way or another?
Well, continuing to add some Howell when he's free, which in many cases he is. Geno is not one of the guys I'm drafting because I don't think he can hold the starting job. Or I think he can. He had a good season 2 years ago, and maybe better coordinating is all that he needs. I thought it was disconcerting that when Drew Lock played last season, he was able to find guys and work through progressions that Geno simply wasn't doing. And then Locke would throw the ball nowhere near the receiver. So you didn't pick up any first downs. But it was very dramatic, the difference in the way they were processing the information, and not in a way that I felt was at all favorable for the starter, who they needed from an arm talent perspective to be out there. I'd like to think that Howell, given an opportunity with a lot of talent around him, one of the things that happened last year is it just, and part of it I think you probably had to put on Howell, but Jahan Dotson's complete and total disappearance meant that he just wasn't really working with anything. And this team is loaded, right? The Seahawks might have the best receiving core in the NFL, and that's, considering some of the things like the Chicago Bears have done, for example. I think that people are sleeping on just how good that could be. But I guess the question I would throw back to you there, because you are so familiar with what the Huskies were doing. This is a Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator who takes over. I think it's a fine hire, but it certainly, as you start out and you're trying to get your feet wet, there's going to be a tendency to rely on yourself and your own strengths. And my understanding of some of the things that he said, which I think that we get very conflicting messages from the way that Seattle has gone about this, where they have the three receivers, they make that additional play to Tyler Lockett. They're committing to him as opposed to trying to go with the young guys, which isn't what they had to do here necessarily. And yet they've also talked about establishing essentially the run and protecting their quarterbacks, protecting the offense, relying on the defense. And the note that you have made several times that jibes so completely with the data on Penix is that he was able to be so successful as a vertical passer, in part because when he would miss and the The charting suggests that he would miss frequently on these vertical passes, that he was actually a very poor vertical passer. Blair Andrews has an article out on the site on him discussing the probable, certainly not guaranteed, but the probable misevaluation of the Atlanta Falcons there. But they would throw deep and he would miss and they'd throw deep again. Well, you can't do that if you're going run, pass, or even if it's not to that extent, if you're trying to make sure that this offense leans on Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. And even just thinking about it from that perspective, this is an offense and a team that really is kind of uniquely positioned to lean on those guys because especially Walker, but including Charbonnet, there's so much talent at running back that if they can use the threat of these receivers to keep the defense honest, maybe you can run the ball pretty effectively. But that would undercut a lot of the things that we need to have happen, A, for the team to be fun in fantasy, and B, probably for the Seahawks to outperform expectations this season.
I would say, you said you wanted to throw that back to me. I would say that would surprise me because I am reading, I hear your point about the Mike Macdonald being a young head coach and how many of them we've seen rely then on their own stuff. And he's a defensive minded coach. So is he going to just be run heavy and defensive and all of that? The way that I'm reading this, the thing that I consistently hear about Mike Macdonald is that he's uniquely intelligent. There's Kyle Hamilton, I think, who is thought of as one of the most intelligent, safeties in the NFL, just like a really cerebral player. I believe when Macdonald left was just like praising. I can't remember what the quote was. I can't remember all that stuff, but some of his former players with the Ravens were like, this guy was, awesome to work with as our defensive coordinator. And so I guess what I'm saying is, is it possible that he could not fall into that trap? And if he's being positioned that way and he's such a young guy that was able to impress enough to get a head coaching job, that you feel like maybe he's sharp enough to know his limitations, which is some of the things that some of the good young coaches, is one of the things Sean McVay did so well, right? When he came in, he was the youngest head coach. He hired Wade Phillips, I think, right away and was like, you run the defense, I'll run the offense. You're this long-time NFL respected defensive coordinator. I got some ideas to do some, really interesting stuff offensively. I'm not saying he's not going to meddle at all with the offense or not be involved with the offense, but that part of it mixed with the decision to bring in Grubb, who I don't think had NFL teams knocking down his door to be their offensive coordinator because he was just an offensive coordinator under Kalen DeBoer. I mean, even he actually wanted to be the UW head coach, and UW made the decision not to hire him after interviewing him. And then he agreed to go to Alabama to be their offensive coordinator. And then Seattle hired him away from Alabama and brought him back to Seattle like a month later, which was kind of a weird timeline and everything for Grubb. But my point is, he's I think in some cases people would think that he's maybe doesn't have the pedigree. Now you could say Macdonald hired that type of a guy so he could kind of tell him what to do. I read it more as he wanted to bring in a type of offense and was looking at a certain type of scheme. And if I think that the Macdonald, if I take people like Kyle Hamilton at their word that he's a very intelligent head coach and understands the modernity of football and where we're going in the evolution of the sport, then I think, and that's what we hear about his defensive schemes as well, that they're the cutting edge of the defensive side of the ball, that he understands what he needed to be looking for on the offensive side of the ball. And that's why he went and got a Ryan Grubb, which to me would then mean that this offense will do a lot of motion and a lot of mystery. So what UW did that I loved so much, and I was so bummed when Kalen DeBoer got hired away, is they did throw to set up the run. They didn't do run, pass, right? It was motion. It was short passes. It was a lot of misdirection in the passing game. One of my favorite plays that I wrote about on Stealing Signals at the time, and I've seen it multiple other places too by now, but it was a fake screen, I think it was a fake a run to one side, so play action, fake screen to the other side, wide receiver screen, and you're like, oh, it was a play action throwback, and then the linebackers flow one direction, and then they flow the other direction, completely clear the middle of the field, and you get a tight end just leaking up the middle, Jack Westover. And so the whole play design is fake the play one way, run the offensive line one way, fake it as a throwback at the line of scrimmage the other way, get everybody flying to the sidelines, and then throw like a delayed right up the seam. And I've seen this play multiple times now. But it's my favorite play in football right now, where like you'll see it as a fake wide receiver screen to one side, then a fake wide receiver screen to the other, and then they throw to the middle, and it's always a leak tight end up the middle. Anyway,
just as long, Ben, as all this creativity goes in favor of Jackson Smith and Jigba in 2024, I'm completely on board with it. When you go back to the context here of the schedule, because they have the NFC North, they have the AFC East, you have potentially 2 power teams in the division themselves. This is a team that loses a little bit more in free agency than they gain. It's also a team that doesn't have a second round pick. It probably wasn't that talented a season ago. You might even look at their line, even though it's not aggressive, as being one that is tough to hit. And this might be more of a 2025 play from a full team perspective, and yet one that you could get pretty excited about the individual pieces on offense. Is that kind of where you see them fitting in?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I'm not drafting the Seahawks really, really heavily. I'm taking a more JSN than I thought I would, because I think he's priced pretty, like he's in a range after he's right about pick 80 on Underdog in a very wide receiver heavy landscape over there. That Deontay Johnson also goes right around there, and Rashee Rice has fallen to there, and your mileage may vary on how you want to play Rashee Rice. I like all 3 of those guys at those prices. But behind them, there's not much left. I mean, Tyler Lockett's one of the few guys behind them that you can then go grab as well. That he's just sort of underpriced as well. I mean, he in best ball, especially if this is going to be a vertical passing game, he's always been a good downfield receiver. That's what he brings. I know he's older. I'm not really like thrilled about banking on a 32-year-old staying healthy the whole year, but I do know he's really good at tracking balls downfield and making plays in traffic for his size and his ability. And that's what this offense is probably going to do some of. So he's an interesting play. I haven't taken a lot of Metcalf. Again, it's just like play the cheaper pieces, right? I take Kenneth Walker when he falls after ADP. I've mixed in Charbonnet into 0 RB builds. I don't have a lot of any of those guys, but I have drafted some of all of them. That's kind of the way that you put it. And I think that's exactly how I'm thinking about it. And Noah Fant late. I mean, he's going to probably run a career high in routes. They don't have Will Dissly and Colby Parkinson anymore. And a lot of the stuff that I was just describing might be Noah Fant running on those leaks up the middle, right? Like some of the stuff that UW did was actually fun for getting tight ends involved. And they had Devin Culp and Jack Westover both do some stuff for them last year. And Culp ended up getting drafted by the Bucks. But yeah, I think Fant could actually
kind of manage your emotional exposures though, because if you draft Fant and he's a hole in your roster, you're like, can your heart take another hole from Fant, even if it's just the 18th round pick? Then I need to figure out something that I don't mind eating or actively like that everybody hates, or activities that people. I mean, there's a briar patch kind of moment here, because I need to figure out some things I can do that seem egregious, but I don't mind, because I want to make a lot of bets in favor of JSN that require me to do something over the top, but to balance that out by not being that bad, because like I'll be wrong. But JSN is going to lead this team in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. He's going to be a fantasy MVP. You should have him in every single draft.
All right. Fair enough. you want to make bets that require you to do crazy things so that you don't get too high on your exposures. Was that it?
No, just like, if you're going to like eat your computer, that's not, you're going to quit fantasy football. You got to figure out something that people would be like, oh, that's a punishment, but it really wouldn't be, because is JSN going to lead the team in everything? Like I'm saying, is he going to be
so?
Then is he going to be a first round pick next year? I'm going to go out there and say JSN's going to be a first round pick next year.
Okay. I mean, he's the one guy
2 hours and 30 minutes in. So some people are going to miss that, and I won't have to be held accountable.
Right. Exactly. He is the one guy that I'm going to draft, that I have to this point drafted more of than anybody. I kind of slow played that, Sean, but I've taken a lot of JSN. But now that you're talking like that, I'm going to have to take a lot more. So it's going to get egregious.
Well, as soon as you explain that they're going to run like definitively, I think that my concern is that they don't run an exciting offense and don't pass the ball at a high enough volume. I think that's the only thing that can hold him back. I don't know. Their quarterbacks are going to be terrible. There are ways that JSN doesn't emerge. So also don't trust me on JSN. Arizona Cardinals. This is a team that that adds like 4 peak age players to meaningful contracts in free agency. They're going to have Kyler. They seem to have an exciting young coaching staff. They draft Marvin Harrison, which, you know, I don't exactly see the full thing with him that a lot of people see, but I mean, there are some pretty impressive notes with some of his production over the last couple of years, and we know he's a freak athlete with this amazing pedigree. Maybe the thing that I put when I did the Rookie 101 series, Ben, which I didn't really have data to support this, but every once in a while you just want to have fun with it. So like this could be the most exciting receiver that we get in the NFL, even considering what Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase have done. And we need somebody to replace Calvin Johnson. We need somebody to replace Randy Moss. Maybe it's going to be Marvin Harrison. They're going to have him. All you really lose is Hollywood, who wasn't doing anything for him anyway. You're going to have Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride as the engines for this offense, 2 unstoppable threats in the receiving game. They competed extremely hard last year. That's more, I mean, a lot of times people talk about intangibles and you're like, well, those things are tangible. You can measure that. In my watching of the Arizona Cardinals, I was surprised how hard they played in games they had no business being in or winning, and they did actually win a few of those. They lost to a lot of bad teams too because they themselves were not good. But if they can continue that under this coaching staff as they add some talent, when we're talking about the Arizona Cardinals being a 2025 playoff team and maybe 2026, 2027, 2028, maybe the most exciting team in the entire NFL. But every once in a while, teams arrive early and, they are not projected to win that many games.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they're a really fun team. I think Kyler looked solid without Cliff Kingsbury in his late season stretch. And I do still think there's passing upside I think everybody at this point, not everybody, a lot of people at this point are like, well, Kyler's just too short and he's not good enough. But he's actually had stretches of like being a really good passer for a while, especially a couple of years ago in the first half of the season before he had the knee injury, not the ACL tear, but the knee injury that like banged him up for the second half. He was kind of playing through in the second half. I want to say that was 2021. But he's had like, I know that's a while ago, but he was like the most efficient passer in the league for half of that season. I can't remember whether it was 2020 or 2021. You get him a new offensive coordinator. I completely agree with you that these guys played hard. I think Jonathan Gannon was a great hire. You have to think that, it goes back to your point when we were talking about the Eagles, that both Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon, the guys that got poached from the Eagles to be head coaches after 2022, looked great in 2023 as head coaches. They were competitive with Josh Dobbs from the right out the gate. They were competitive down the stretch. Trey McBride goes off with Kyler and looks incredible. We were talking about him every single Sunday night before we recorded our Stealing Bananas. We were like, what was the most impressive thing you saw? We're both just like, yeah, Trey McBride looks like the next Gronk. Like, I mean, that was like before we even jumped on the show. Like that was what we would talk about every week, it seemed like. And so I assume you're very much, we've talked about both liking McBride. I assume you're very much with me on this one, but I got asked a couple of times about the Marvin Harrison impact for McBride. The way I put it is, I talked a little bit about how the rookies, even the hits as rookies, like Jefferson and Chase, then went on to earn a lot more volume in year 2. Both of those guys earned at least 2.0 targets per game more in year 2 than year 1, even though they played snaps early in their rookie year. And I think a big part of that is so some of the late season rookie production we see is just snap volume. Like AJ Brown didn't play a lot early in the year, and then he was playing in the late part of the year, and then he was able to be more productive. But I think even for the guys that are playing a lot early, some of it is they don't get the first read targets is the new really popular stat. They don't get the first read targets. They don't get the deference within the passing game until later. They prove themselves the first half of the year. Later in the season, it's like, we're going to draw up more plays for you. We're going to make you more of a focal point. That could happen with Marvin Harrison. But I think if that happens, I'm still like, I just think this becomes the Kelsey, Tyreek Hill, an elite tight end and an elite receiver. I'm that confident that Trey McBride by that point will be having a great season and be playing very well. He just looked too dynamic on film, even more. But the numbers were incredible too. I mean, he had a better yards per out run than Laporta last year. You go look at it, like, I don't think people realize how good Trey McBride was last year. Maybe they do. I don't know. But I think he's going to be the focal point of the passing game in the early part of the year. Harrison's going to draw some attention, but not like it's tough for rookies to just be superstars right away. McBride, I think, is the guy that racks up all the early volume, and it's actually good for him to have Harrison. And if Harrison really does hit late in the year, then it's even like it's just great for this whole passing game. Suddenly you have Kyler with a dynamic wide receiver and an elite tight end. I mean, this team could be really, really fun. It also, for me, Sean, I'm having a really hard time pulling the trigger on James Conner. We've talked about how he had the best year of his career last year in a lot of ways, but it makes Trey Benson a really like big priority 0 RB player for me, where he's the really traditional play, explosive rookie. Yeah, I know there's some issues with his profile. I think he's basically a pure handcuff, but he's the rookie behind the aging veteran. And if that veteran misses time, he steps into, I think, pretty clearly the whole role, because there's not a real RB3 threat here in an offense that I'm expecting to be peaking late season as Marvin Harrison really establishes himself. If you think down the stretch, you have Kyler, Harrison, McBride, and then Benson in the backfield. I mean, that's going to be a really fun team in the final couple months. And it would be, I think they're going to score points. It would be a really good situation, I think, for Benson down the stretch. I think he could be a key player.
And I almost never draft these running backs who are the veteran starters ahead of a huge young threat. But Pete and I did select Connor, I think, in our draft this week because he was like 17 picks below ADP. He was well behind Benson. And, for all the other reasons you mentioned there, this offense could create a lot of value there. You mentioned McBride and Harrison together. I kind of love the offenses where you have 2 stars and basically nobody else. Now, they're going to obviously run some guys out there, but no other target earners. So the defense can't focus on either one of them, and yet the volume lines up still very nicely. So in many ways, that's actually the very perfect fit. That kind of transitions us, I should say, into the Los Angeles Rams, where we have Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. You have the controversial Blake Corum addition at running back. But, Ben, this is a team that was peaking down the stretch and looked like it was possible they could go on a Super Bowl run, and then they finally are able to add some in the offseason, right? This is a team that has been in sort of Super Bowl or bust mode for a long time, but they go out there and they sign Jonah Jackson to a 3-year, $51 million contract at guard. They make a kind of weird decision to add Parkinson, but also add a corner at a pretty decent salary. So they've made some additions there, but they also have a first-round draft pick for the first time in a long time. But it's not just the first round. They actually have 4 picks in the first 3 rounds. And another little thing to mention there about the Cardinals actually had 4 third-round picks. So when you're talking about a team adding just an insane amount of depth this offseason, or potentially if some of those picks hit. But the Rams here, a team that could be deeper, more talented, and really ready to take the next step, and yet their line gives you plenty of room to bet the over if you believe that those things are going to come to fruition.
Yeah, I thought they did a good job this offseason. The Blake Corum stuff, I mean, it's funny. You said controversial in sort of a, joking way, but I am Sean, I'm stunned that people responded how they did to the Blake Corum selection. They went into the season last year with Cam Akers and Kyron Williams. They were planning on having both guys. Cam Akers then wasn't a part of, couldn't be a part of their plan for off-field reasons mostly. They had to ship him out as quick as possible. And then Kyron went down, and they had to sign street free agents in season to come in and play because they didn't have backups. They didn't trust Zach Evans. The most obvious team to draft a running back this year, to me, felt like the Rams. I was a little surprised they did it in round 3. I thought they would be in that run of round 4 or round 5 picks, but they have talked about how they really liked Corum's skill set and that he's very similar in a lot of ways to Kyron Williams. And they needed a backup running back. Like Ronnie Rivers was going to be their backup running back if they didn't draft somebody. He's a backup. And now Kyren Williams has a little bit of a foot thing and Twitter's going nuts. He had fallen substantially just on the pick of Corum. I think he's going to fall even more. And it doesn't make any sense to either of us. I know we've talked about it. Like Kyren belongs still in the second round, but he's fallen to the mid. Now maybe he'll fall to the late third. Who knows what happens? Setting that aside, and because that goes back, I'm not going to set it aside. That goes back to what we talked about with the Falcons, where the Rams like to keep a running back on the field all 3 downs, keep the 11 personnel on the field so the defense can't substitute. They've said this. They have told us this. They're not going to, like, they might give Corum some drives within a game, but unless you think they're going to alternate drives 50-50 and cut Kyren's work that much, it's probably going to be at least like two drives for Kyren, 1 drive for Corum, and Kyren gets the 2-minute drill stuff. And I mean, that's fine. That's not a big deal. Kyren's coming from a position of playing 95% plus snaps. We probably wanted him to get a little bit of a breather anyway. The guy's a smaller back, and for him to have to play that much was going to be tough. And the foot injury stuff, I mean, come on. Like, they're saying it's no big deal. And there's like 3 teams right now that are saying their lead back isn't at camp because they have some lingering thing. No smart coach wants their lead running back running a bunch of reps in May. There's just literally no benefit to it. It's a running back. Like, save him till August, save him till September if you can. Anyway, I still like the Kyren Williams price. I still like Blake Corum, Shawn, frankly, but you've talked about, there's some concerns about the skill set. And yet I think he's an interesting handcuff, similar to the Trey Benson conversation we just had, where if Kyren misses time, Blake Corum probably is a 3-down back in a really good situation. I think he's one of the more valuable handcuffs situationally in terms of what he could step into. But yeah, the passing game is so concentrated. It's so appealing. I guess my big question with them so far has been whether to get, and we were talking about betting odds and stuff, but we've just like broken this. We've gone 3 hours now and we're just talking about like fantasy and breaking down every team. I've been trying to figure out whether to go Puka and Kupp on the same offenses. If I take Puka at the late first, whether Kupp is a good pick of the 3-4 turn or not. I'm sure a lot of other people are having that kind of thought. I tend to think you probably
depends on whether or not you want to have Matthew Stafford on your team as well.
Yeah. Well, if you take both of them, you're definitely taking Stafford. I've tended to want to do one or the other. I think Kupp's an interesting value where he's going, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe you can do it both. It's a lot of capital, I think, to give to both of them. And part of it is like either of them can really concentrate the work if the other is not doing well or is injured or whatever, because we've seen both of them do it. Nacua did it when Kupp was out. We've obviously seen Kupp do it in the past. This is an offense that concentrates the volume regardless. Demarcus Robinson, late round, he's going to be your blocking wide receiver that's going to have a few splash weeks. He's somebody to at least consider in the later rounds. I think he's going to play quite a bit. They switched from Tutu Atwell to him specifically for the run blocking stuff, but then he had, because he's on the field, because they want to keep the same guys on the field all the time, he had some splash weeks down the stretch, and so he's another guy that's interesting. It's a fun offense, but yeah, I mean, as far as like how to play them, I don't really have a strong opinion on. They seem thin and fragile, and so I think health just becomes a very big part of it. How healthy can these guys stay? If they stay healthy, I think they can probably beat their win total. If they don't, they probably can't, and I don't want to take that gamble.
Are they 2.5 games worse than the 49ers?
Probably not. I mean, especially if they stay healthy, probably not. The Niners have more depth to them, I think.
Well, the 49ers lose arguably a little bit of that depth. They lose Armstead, they lose Young, they add some D depth back in free agency. They have a lot of picks, including 3 round 4s, which allows them to take swings on interesting guys like Cowing and Garendo. We're going to get a trade here? Because if they move Ayuk or Samuel, I do think it actually hurts the offense significantly. Pearsall,
yeah, I do too.
In my mind, is a pretty long shot bet to be able to fill back in much of that production.
I agree, but I mean, most of what they're saying, Shawn, is they're like, that ship sailed. Like after the draft went by, they had some quotes. It was like, we're not intending to do that. I think most in the fantasy community are expecting it because they took Pearsall in the first round. I don't think that's how Kyle Shanahan thinks about draft capital. I think he's told us that a million times. Like, he'll take a first round pick and just not play him. He'll trade 3 first round picks to move up to get Trey Lance, and literally started twice in his San Francisco 49ers career. I mean, he'll do the Trey Sermon thing and then draft Elijah Mitchell 3 rounds later and just start Mitchell over Sermon. He doesn't. So
he's not great at the draft, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
but simultaneously so good at so many other things that they somehow still end up with one of the NFL's deepest teams and then best coach teams.
Right. And I don't think they ever, like, the reason to trade one of these guys would be to build out future draft capital, because they don't have anything else to acquire. Like, they're not trying to acquire a player for this year. And yet they want to win a Super Bowl this season. They played in the Super Bowl last year. It does seem like that ship has sailed. I think if that trade was going to happen, it was going to happen in a way that they could then draft somebody, like get a pick from the 2024 draft somebody that they could then play in 2024. They weren't able to make those deals during the draft. And I take them at their word after the draft that they're like, we're not actually going to make a trade now. Like, we're just going to hold these guys.
If there's a defensive star, for example,
maybe
that's a better fit for what they need, and you could get a player for player trade, maybe. I mean, those are tough.
We don't see those. Yeah, right. That's exactly. I agree with you. I think that's possible and more likely than them trading for future draft capital. And then exactly what you said is kind of my thought. I'm writing that off because those are tough and they just don't seem to happen because the way the contracts go and everything else. So anyway, that the Niners 11.5 wins, being bet to the under just because it's the highest number on the board. I mean, you get plus money to take them as an over. Like, I don't really mind that either, because I do think they're going to keep these guys intact, and I think they are going to be good again, although they have to play a really tough schedule, right? And there's they went 12-5 last year, and you're talking about having to get above 11-5, and that was the good season. It's tough to get over 11.5 wins. There were 3 12-win teams in the NFC last year: the Lions, the Cowboys, and the Niners. Baltimore was the only team on the AFC side that got over 11.5 wins. They went 13-4. I think I would still take the plus money and take the over on the Niners. Probably take the over on the Rams too. I think you made a good point there that they're probably not 2 wins worse.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to be caught taking the over and everything, but I mean, they were plus 193 last year, and they're going to be very, very good. Their quarterback gets, there's so much talk about how, whether or not he deserved to be the MVP. And when you play at that level, I think it's easy to miss the fact that when you're a late round pick and you're going into the subsequent season, it actually does help you in terms of protecting against a fall off, protecting against some kind of collapse, protecting against, what happened to Geno Smith last year, that you have that extra experience now. And I think it raises the floor. And so, I mean, he's going to play pretty well, and they're going to be coached well. They're going to have some pretty unlucky things happen to get under 12 wins.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. We don't want to be taking the over on every team, but I do think if you look at where the NFC West numbers are, and especially like where they're getting bet with the Niners, for me, it's in part that they're getting bet to the under so much, so you can get a nice little price to take the over. But I don't want to say that all 4 NFC West teams are going to go over, but it seems plausible based on where their numbers are. This could be. I think this conversation, Shawn, has gotten me a little bit more excited about the NFC West overall. Especially the Cardinals conversation. They're going to be good down the stretch, I think. And I do think, talking through the Seahawks, that you got to, if you're a Seahawks fan, I'm not even that big of a Seahawks fan. We talk about it some. Like, I'm from Seattle. I grew up a Vikings fan. I root for the Seattle teams in every other sport. But I think if you're a big-time Seattle fan, you have to be excited about the McDonald Grubb hires. I do think those are smart hires. McDonald is a defensive-minded coach, and we do usually prefer an offensive-minded coach for a variety of reasons, one of which is if your offense is great, your OC is going to get hired away to go head coach somewhere else. But then I don't think that will happen with Ryan Grubb. He just failed to get the UW head coaching job, just recently at college. I don't think he's the type that will get hired for an NFL head coaching job quickly. Depending on, I guess if the Seahawks offense was that great, it could happen. But My point is McDonald, as far as a DC, that's like the one knock against him as an optimal hire. The rest of it, modern scheme, young, seems to be very bright, seems to be willing to change and evolve with the sport. All of that stuff seems very promising. Anyway, we already talked about Seattle, but each of these teams, I think you can make some really favorable, optimistic comments about and think about it in a positive way going forward. This is going to be a good division for the next few years.
And even if it's a small part of it, I do think that if you like to play the overs in the NFC West, you can balance that by looking at the divisions that they play across. And if you have some skepticism about the Bears, the Packers, you can get under those. You look across at the AFC East. That was one of the things that I made some, vaguely boldish predictions on a week ago where, I mentioned that the Bills and Dolphins are possible collapse teams. Certainly you could go under on the Jets line as well. That would be a way to balance it if you want to do that. The Cardinals and the Seahawks, very wide range of outcomes, very fun teams. We could see them struggle within this overall schedule context, but the NFC West should be fun to follow in 2024.
Absolutely. Shawn, 3 hours today. We got a little derailed. It's always tough to do the projects where you're like, we're going to go through every division. We're going to go through every team, what have you. When we started with the AFC, we were able to like skip past some teams, but it gets tougher as you get through. Like there's 32 teams, there's 8 divisions, and you end up like wanting to give some thoughts on every team. That's what I wind up doing. And then it's
if
like,
we're going to do a show that is like cover 16 teams, it's going to be 3 hours. So
it's going to be 3 hours. But I think this was even longer than last week's AFC. And yet I'm sure the listeners are like, that's fine. Because we had a good conversation, a lot of good thoughts on these teams. This is so important. I mean, it's fun and to talk about the betting angles and stuff, but it's so important for the fantasy prices. It's so important at this time of year to be thinking about what are the teams that the market is just not valuing correctly. You talked about like the Panthers, for example. You can get so much exposure to the different pieces if there's just not the right level of enthusiasm. And there's some teams that, like, we talked through some of them, like the Bucks. For me, I'm not taking a lot of Bucks at all. I took, one Mike Evans pick. I've taken no Rashad White. I took, he strikes me as the quintessential dead zone back from, back in the day. It's a little bit of a different landscape now, but he strikes me as that profile. I think I've taken Godwin once or twice is all, and I don't. And then Bucky Irving is, I guess he's the one guy. If you want to attack the Bucks, you want to go do it through Bucky Irving. It's right there in the name. But we talked through all these teams, Shawn. I think it's really useful and very important to consider in terms of how these expectations can inform your player decisions. I really do think the team level predictions can be a really good way to start to figure out, what you want to be heavy or light on in your early drafts.
And for me, it was very helpful to have this chance to sort of synthesize what I would consider to be my prior knowledge on some of the headline players, what happened in free agency, what happened in the draft, and what the schedule context is. And to put those 4 pieces together and think through them, especially with you, was a lot of fun and very valuable. So that'll do it for today's episode of Stealing Bananas. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me, as always, is Ben Gretch. You can follow at Yards per Gretch, at Stealing Signals, at Stealing Lines. Again, I'd really encourage everyone, if you can, to get out there and subscribe to the new video project that Ben is doing at Stealing Signals. We'd love to have you also subscribe to the Best Ball Banana Stand. Join me in column for OT. RV Radio 2024 is that code if you want 10% off your RotoViz subscription. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.